So today in the theme of Lipedema Awareness Month, and it shouldn't just be a month. It's awareness. We're in a community where we're trying to bring this condition to the forefront. There's been some very exciting traction in my neck of the woods. For those of you that do not know by the number of times that I say "a" in my lives, I'm from Canada, and I'm joined today by Emma, who is also in Canada, but more importantly, spearheaded a pretty exciting initiative to help those of you dealing with this undiagnosed, because that's all you are in Canada is undiagnosed. Lipedema Canada has started, and there's a bunch of new resources available we're going to talk about today, but I would like to first introduce Emma and let her explain to you what the group is and who she is to be doing all of this. Emma, thank you for joining me today.
Thanks so much for having me, Debbie. My name is Emma Cloney, and I am the Vice President of Lipedema Canada. Lipedema Canada is a national, federally registered not-for-profit serving as the association for lipedema across the entire nation. And we work closely with groups in nearly every province to try and improve the situation for lipedema in Canada, raising awareness, creating advocacy, and advocating to the governments to have our disease recognized and covered as an insured service.
Kind of what I thought I'd do this month, because you're of special interest to me because you're in Canada, but I wanted to just start promoting people that have always been out there doing the good work, putting in the time. A lot of people come and go, not because you don't want to participate or be the resource, but it's hard because you personally are also dealing with symptoms and surgeries. And so I'm glad this has evolved for you to a point where, Canada's like the States in many ways. Everybody's going to do it by state because of the Medicare and how things are billed there. But in Canada, even though we have a national system, the health is still provincial.
Delivered
So it
provincially.
makes it like a national group is good for support and kumbaya. But as far as, what I know people are demanding, give me the book. What do I take to my doctor? You know what I mean? It's a conversation that long before Emma gives you the book, writes it, publishes, finds the money to do all that, it's very much giving these women the confidence to even have that conversation. You know what I mean?
I absolutely know what you mean. Well, so there's a couple of different channels. Like Lipedema Canada is unique in a variety of ways. And I think I was thinking about this morning, actually.
Yeah, it's niche for sure, right?
Yeah, I think unlike a lot of the Facebook groups, which start and remain only as support groups, Lipedema Canada started in that arena because so much of our support actually does happen online, as you know. Like, that's how we network, that's how we share information. For a lot of us, including myself, that's how I even learned about the lipedema community at all and how to access doctors and treatment. Like, the online community has been absolutely fundamental. It is pivotal to this disease. I discovered I had lipedema, and before I could even figure out how do you find a doctor, how do you any of that, I had never joined a support group in my whole life, not in person, not virtual. And for some reason, I was completely compelled to go to Facebook and put lipedema into the search bar. And I looked specifically for support groups, Canadian support groups, and I found other smaller offshoot groups. And this is before Lipedema Canada was Lipedema Canada. But why I was compelled to do that, I don't know. But I think the fact that we find this disease and then it takes only minutes to realize that there are no services in our country. And then we immediately go, if not that, and if not the usual path to find healthcare, how do I find answers? And so people were taking it to the internet. So what I was going to say is the unique thing about Lipedema Canada, specifically Lipedema Canada, which is a federally incorporated nonprofit, we are not just an online group, but we are a legitimate cooperation that works as the association across the entire nation, and then has many associated in-province associations across the country. So we're managing the online portion because we know that that's where our community meets. But what we'd really love is to make sure that as new people find us online, that they know that there is an incredible website full of tons of resources, and that every time we identify a need in the community, we are building resources to share with you by putting them on the website so that you can access what you need as a patient to advocate for yourself, to educate yourself, to help educate others, because that's a huge part of our job as people with rare diseases, is we do a lot of educating. And also to find pathways to like the newest information that's coming out, and to stay informed about where do you even get help from here and what's been working for others. And so it's a collaborative in that sense. So to answer your question more succinctly, what can we do in this call? I think it would be to sort of help illuminate the fact that this group is not just an online entity, but is actually tangibly working very hard in real time across the country to set up, basically create healthcare where there was no healthcare before.
Just like your self-care treatments, which you hear me talking about all the time, you need to try new resources. And to Emma's point, because it is certainly in Canada, provincially kind of broken down as far as the legislation, the paperwork, you might be flying across the country to see a specialist, but where you reside is where your paperwork is anchored to, right? So
Yeah.
I think you have representation. Correct me if I'm wrong, because I was surfing last night. You have representation in every province and territory, or almost. Tell me where you're represented now.
So when Lipedema Canada first started, we were trying to figure out how we could approach the provincial health entities, because we knew that being the national was going to be the amazing sort of umbrella. So we sought volunteers based solely on their geography. And then as we picked up steam as Lipedema Canada, we started to realize that our mission came really squarely into focus of what we needed to do. And this is not a small job. What we are taking on as Lipedema Canada is Herculean. We have representation in all of Canada, and that's because Lipedema Canada has restructured so that we will approach each of the provinces as a national group. And so we're starting in Manitoba while we're working, because again, several of our directors are in Manitoba. And because of our government in Manitoba, they've expressed an interest in working with us. So we're starting with Manitoba as a pilot province to work with the government to create covered insured services for people with lipedema, starting with compression and MLD. Right. And then working with doctors in Manitoba who've also expressed interest in becoming specialists for the surgery. And so our goal is to start by creating potentially a center of excellence where there would be an avenue for people across the country to access at least the beginnings of a foundation for lipedema care in Canada. And then we're going to start moving to every single province and repeat the system and work with the provincial organizations wherever possible. We're affiliated with provincial organizations in the Atlantic, across the East, in Ontario. And so there's some amazing groups that existed even before Lipedema Canada. Lipedema Saskatchewan is actually the longest standing. Yep. And they have made some amazing inroads with their government there, doing a very similar idea. So we're not reinventing the wheel necessarily, but we're seeing where others have been successful. And we're working towards mirroring that by creating working groups with the provinces. Like all communities for lipedema, each province is going to have some nuances and some differences in what services are available. Where you live is going to dictate what services are available. So what we're doing as Lipedema Canada is we are representing all Canadians with lipedema by creating substantive healthcare changes which can be universally transferred to every single province. And that, without getting into too many of the details, that follows the Prescribed Canada Health Act. So for anyone who knows anything about healthcare, it's that the Canada Health Act dictates that healthcare needs to be universal and portable. And what that means in English is what you get in one province, you should be able to get in any other province. And so by us solving this problem by using one pilot province at a time, we can create health policy that can then be transferred from province to province. And that's how we're going to eat the elephant, as it were.
So I can't stress how big a deal this is for Canada. We do not have a standard of care, for those of you that resonate with that term in the States. There are 22 very qualified people that put a lot of time and a lot of hours into that, but it's just a piece of paper. The understanding, the broad stream awareness, it certainly helps in Canada, but there's our own steps that we're going to need to go to. Is that something It's a question I've had a few times. In Canada, I know that you're not working on the standard of care, but what are the steps that you guys have going on right now to just get this condition on the map? Can I ask that question?
That's an amazing question. I would love to answer that question. So I'm going to take a step back because you alluded to my personal struggle. And
Yes.
so I want to mention this a little bit because it's really relevant to how we got started as Lipedema Canada and also why and how we're working on the goals we're working on. So
That's
for
why I
those,
dropped the hint.
so for those that don't know, I am also a nurse. And when I found out I got diagnosed with lipedema, I discovered it first on my own in a random query following an injury, a back injury. I was having really weird symptoms on my legs that were mimicking that of a spinal cord injury. And so I happened to just put painful legs or painful fat into a Google search. And all of a sudden, like everyone's story, a picture of what I swore was my legs showed up and I panicked. And I looked through on the photo and thought, oh my God, I don't know how this happened. Somebody got a picture of me. I've never taken a picture like this. Long story short, I looked through and it said lipedema. And I went, I'm a nurse. I've been a nurse for 10 years. I have no idea what that is. And so, of course, that led to reading and watching 21 hours of grand rounds presentations from the world experts, and then searching for doctors across Canada and realizing that there were none, and checking our standards of care and finding out that there were none. And the long story short was I started reading legal cases to find out who had applied for coverage in this province to have the surgeries, which I now knew were medically necessary, had since been diagnosed by international surgeons. And I realized that all of these legal cases had similar arguments. There were little steps that had been missed here, there by well-meaning lay people who just didn't understand how to navigate a system that was built to watch them fail. And so by doing all of the research and finding out where did the people ahead of me go wrong, and not through their fault, I'm not making any fault statements, but I wanted to figure out
the reality that many go through on this journey. Yep.
And so I looked up how the rules worked in the province of Manitoba and I followed them. And I found out by getting rejected twice by the province for care that, you know, your referrals had to come from a plastic surgeon in Manitoba, even though the plastic surgeons didn't know anything about lipedema. And you had to have letters of referral where a plastic surgeon then sent a referral letter to a doctor in another country and said, this is the person I want them to see. You had to have letters of medical necessity that specifically dictated that surgery is not available in Canada, and it's not, and that the surgeries are medically necessary. And so there were all these like tiny hoops. It was a series of 1,000 hoops to dive through. At the end of the day,
something that you could interpret with your medical background, such an advantage.
Right. So that was the advantage. And it's such an unfair situation. If me using all of my education, skills, and experience, and really all my brain power to do this, and I was already ill and struggling and in pain, and I'm thinking, how does any person with even one step less skills ever accomplish this? It was a system set up to fail. So why this is important. Eventually, after a not very long period of time, I was the first woman in Canada to be approved and receive surgeries internationally for lipedema. First, my entire treatment plan had been approved, and that included all the way down to skin excisions, and this was in writing. And then I was sent to a surgeon in the States. And upon returning from my third surgery, the government was really shocked at the amount they had been billed for the surgeries, and they panicked. And there had been lots of other people who had been applying for coverage, and the government realized very quickly that what appeared to be a rare disease was actually very common, and there were a lot of us in a lot of need. And without getting into too many of the specifics, the government basically just said, we don't want to pay for this. And we said, well, you can't just take coverage away after you've already signed it over. And so that started a legal battle that went on for 18 months, going back and forth, specifically related to my case, which has now resolved with a settlement whereby 7 of my 10 surgeries are being covered. But having had to switch to a specialist in Germany, 3 of my 4 surgeries in Germany were at self-pay. So why is this relevant? Even though technically I have met my care, I'm not finished my surgeries yet, but I have taken care of my personal situation. There was no part of myself as a nurse or as a human being that could be like, well, I'm just going to walk away. We have to find a way to make this better. Nobody should ever have to fight this hard for healthcare. And there are people choosing medically assisted dying over living because there is no services. People are suffering in this community. So to tag back into what you said, why is this relevant? It means that we at Lipedema Canada have an intimate understanding of what the barriers are to care. And while we are not currently affiliated with every province in Canada anymore, we have great information that we worked together as a team. It was a completely cohesive team, and everyone had different experiences in different provinces. And we've learned lots about what each of those provinces are covering, are not covering. So to answer your question, what are we working on as Lipedema Canada?
Yes.
First and foremost, in order for us to know how many people in Canada even have lipedema, we have to be able to be diagnosed. So that means we need to be able to have a doctor who knows enough about our condition to feel comfortable actually providing a diagnosis. So step one, providing education on the website about how you would even go through the steps of a diagnosis using resources that were created by Lipedema Foundation and the Fat Disorders Society and all scholarly sources. Two, we have a diagnostic code for lipedema. It's recognized by the World Health Organization, but it's in what's called ICD-11. And you're like, Emma, what is that? Let me explain. ICD-11 is the most up-to-date billing code, okay?
Yep.
But in Canada, all provinces are either using ICD-9 or ICD-10. And ICD-9 started in 2002, meaning that if you were diagnosed with a disease that wasn't well enough known in 2002, there's literally no way for them to assign you the diagnosis code. Why is that important? Your doctor could just tell you you have lipedema. Yes, they can. But it means that the government at a larger scale where they add up how many diabetics are here, how many people have heart failure, how many people have this, that, and the other thing. And that's what decides where the money goes for things like research and care. We don't even count because we can't be counted. So we are going to be lobbying to the government to have our ICD-11 code added to each of the provincial billing systems so that we can start to find out what is the prevalence of lipedema. And we can also demonstrate, which we already know as a community, that this is a widespread illness for people assigned female at birth. And we can't just pretend this is just obesity because it's not. They're totally separate disease entities. Okay, so education for clinicians, adding of the disease code. And then, yeah, you're right. We need standard of care. A standard of care, how does that get written? Well, I can tell you. I had to look into it. I had to know a lot about it. So a standard of care will come to be by doctors and clinicians. So clinicians being nurses, nurse practitioners, physiotherapists, pharmacists, etc., and surgeons, doctors. Them coming together, reviewing the literary research on lipedema, and then deciding on the best practices and publishing it. How do we get there? Well, Lipedema Canada has been approaching doctors, physiotherapists, and specialists in every province in Canada. And we're slowly gathering up doctors who have interest in knowing more about this. And we're also working with international doctors who are willing to come on and also be authors. Some of those same people you mentioned in the other standards of care, there's German ones and US. Our plan is to approach them and find more allies in the community for lipedema and bring them together to develop a standard of care so that we do have a method, a pathway to guide treatment in this country. So then you're like, okay, so you've done those things. You get a disease code, you have education for patients, education for clinicians, and now we have a team of doctors who are working on a standard of care, which they're all qualified to do, but we have to go and find them. So part of it is Lipedema Canada's matchmaking. We're going out to doctors and saying, here's the situation. Do you want to help? And a lot of them are saying yes.
On an outreach basis, I think it's funny when you were explaining earlier about, the steps and getting the billing code, and that's great. To turn back to the States for a minute, because it's a challenge there as well. Just because you've got the standard of care, just because all of this is in place, that probably the biggest piece of time is to get that medical community and qualified individuals to offer those diagnoses. So, it's time, it's consistent effort, and but wow, what a lot of traction you've made as far as those steps.
Yep.
I do know some of the doctors that you have been speaking with, and if this does have the opportunity and you're watching this outside of the lipedema community, it's very important to understand, Emma's mentioned it a few times, what is deemed as a rare disease is if it's 1 in 9, some say
Not
111,
rare.
but I'm going to say 1 in 9.
Yeah.
That's as prevalent as diabetes. And look at the resources and the infrastructure and the home care. And so that, this is, and I bet you a lot of the people out there walking around with diabetes probably, or maybe have lipedema. There's a lot of no, you
No,
think so?
no. So, thank you for mentioning that. So,
Oh, I'm glad you bring that up. I've certainly
one of
seen
the,
misdiagnose. Um, and we're fortunate that we can still have a doctor visit covered.
yeah,
Everybody thinks we got free healthcare in Canada, but
nothing is free in
it's the
Canada.
quality of care or what's covered that Emma and I are kind of hashing out here. Go
Yeah.
ahead.
Okay. So, again, and forgive me for getting passionate, but as a healthcare
No, that's
professional,
good.
I love to sort of take some of these things apart. So when people see lipedema, and they often associate it with people living in larger bodies, and we associate that is obesity, and obesity must be connected with diabetes, and obesity is connected with diabetes, but lipedema fat and the way that it sits on the body, where it's normally below the waistline, has actually been shown to be metabolically protective. What does that mean? There is a lower incidence in lipedema patients of diabetes overall, not just relevant to the BMI, but overall. And so this is more of a credit to the fact that you're going to see lipedema patients who are metabolically healthy, meaning they're not specifically struggling with insulin resistance. They are not diabetics. They may not have problems with their blood pressure. And they may not have a lot of the things that are associated only with obesity. Obesity and lipedema can live together in the same body at the same time. And in about 50% of cases, it does. But it's believed that the lipedema is actually a protective factor against things like diabetes. But you're right in that it is so common that it's as common as diabetes, it's as common as breast cancer, but it's currently not getting the research and not getting the attention. And so you could ask yourself why that is, but the answers are pretty straightforward and pretty well understood. It's a disease that affects mostly women, and women in healthcare are desperately underrepresented in research, in funding, and any kind of women's health disease often is many years behind. Just women are not studied the same way.
Yeah.
And then the other huge barrier is that currently, with the exception of British Columbia, and this is a new change, none of the medical schools in Canada teach about lipedema. Now, lipedema has been known to the medical community since 1940. How is it possible that 80 years have gone by and we're not teaching this as a standard in the healthcare institutions, not in nursing school, not in physiotherapy school, not in med school? So another portion of what Lipedema Canada is doing is approaching the med schools in all of the provinces and making a case for why this should be taught. And also, those of us on the board who are healthcare professionals will be offering to go and do talks to medical schools and create awareness. And so, again, this is part of the Herculean task, is that how do you solve a problem that seems to have no solution? You have to find out where all the steps in the broken chain are and try to do something to fix it.
Or not, I love what Emma said. And I'm going to wave my little flag here for a minute. When Emma knew something was wrong, and her instinct as a woman and her understanding as a medical person said, let's go to the internet and look. And one of the terms you searched was painful fat. And I've done a few articles. And when I started my group is Vibration for Fat Disorders. And if I take grief over anything, it's, oh, well, why would you call it that? Because many of us within the community are proud that we've gotten that diagnosis. There's a lot of time and energy and, heartache to get to that point. And we're proud that we know what we have, and we have a mentality where we want others to understand and identify it. But the reality is most of the world doesn't know what this is or what to call it. They just know it's fat that hurts or fat that won't go away. And we did a nutrition chat last week, and most of you aren't eating enough. And what you are eating, maybe it's more of an allergy or a sensitivity. There's a lot of things going on with this condition that you can manage on your own. And part of the self-care is understanding some of those basics. So, Emma and the group is a great place for information, but I don't want anyone thinking that a week after joining, you're going to meet your provincial rep and you're going to get a diagnosis, and then you're going to get all this coverage from your, that we're still in that forming stage, norming, conforming, too much.
Nothing's ever going to be fast enough. And I can tell you that as someone who struggled through the system and couldn't understand why this sort of thing was taking so long. So this is why I'm telling you about some of the things Lipedema Canada is tackling, because standing on the other side as a member onlooking from the Facebook side, or as a member of the community looking up to us with hope, going, please save me.
Yeah.
Help is coming. You can be part of help. We need help helping you. Because we are also lipedema patients. So if you have skills to offer, if you're mad enough to be passionate, then come get involved, because we can channel that passion into something effective. But to go back, so I mean, you touched on a lot of really complex things, and I wanna touch back on them because they are hot button issues around lipedema. So first, you talked about lipedema being classified as a fat disorder, and that's not incorrect. Lipedema, the misinformation that exists around lipedema, is not specifically malice. It comes from the fact that there's so many unanswered questions. And while research is working really, really hard to try and get us better answers, what are the genetic causes? We know that it runs in families. We suspect very strongly that it's triggered by hormones. But every day research is evolving to give us better answers about what lipedema is. But until we have all those great answers, there will always be versions of misinformation. Yes. So one of the things that we should touch on, because you talked about obesity and diet and nutrition, and people who having obesity who could manage that. Just like lipedema is not taught in medical schools, the average physician receives one 40-minute lecture in their entire medical career on nutrition. Yep. And so when we go to our doctors and we are constantly told things like, have you tried eating less and moving more? That's a People magazine piece of advice. That doesn't come from obesity science in any way. Obesity is an incredibly complex disease with an incredibly diverse set of reasons: genetics, environment, and most often not specifically diet. And when we talk about our lipedema population, we have some of the highest incidence of eating disorders, but not overeating disorders, undereating. Undereating, because these people, these poor patients, are told for our whole lives that we have some sort of moral reason for why our bodies have changed in such an awful and defiant way, and why none of the things we're doing are remedying it. And this is an incredibly complex thing, and I don't have all the answers, but here's what I can tell you. Holding on to weight and inflammation in your body is not just centered around what you put in your mouth. And we have lots of patients who eat less than 800 calories a day who are effectively starving themselves and are still living in large bodies, 200-300-pound bodies. And you'd ask, well, how does that equate to calories in and calories out? It's that the emotional stress, the physiological stress that we are under, also contributes to inflammation. And lipedema is not specifically only a fat disorder, it's a loose connective tissue disorder. And that affects a connective tissue is your skin, your vasculature, this subcutaneous fat. It's a lot of things. So without getting too far into any kind of science or professing to know more about it than I do, I can tell you that it is incredibly complex. What things help? We should be less concerned about the morals of our food and more concerned about how does the food we put into our body act as medicine. So things like eating a lower carbohydrate diet or a rare adipose diet has been effective for some people. Some people get a lot of relief from ketogenic diets. And for others of us, having any kind of restrictive eating adds so much emotional turmoil and stress that by itself can make our lipedema worse. So the answer is be curious. Be curious about trying things that might make you feel better inside your own body. And be less concerned about what a scale says, because anytime your scale changes 5 pounds in a night, that's a fluid shift. Nobody loses 5 pounds of fat or gains 5 pounds of fat overnight, no matter what you're eating. So focusing on the inflammatory portions of lipedema, and then the mental health aspect of like, what does this assigning of responsibility towards, the morals of our food and our bodies do to our mental health when we're already living with a condition that feels very out of control? So to touch just on the last part that you said, which is the idea that lipedema or that lipedema patients can't lose weight. No, lipedema patients can lose weight. It can be very difficult. Lipedema fat is resistant. So you may find that you're able to lose a lot of other weight off your body. Maybe you find that your chest is slimmed out and you're toning up in other places. But you may still find that even if the cells shrink, because when we lose weight, all it is just cells shrinking. So those cells might shrink a little bit, and it might help reduce your pain if it went with, anti-inflammatory things. But you're still going to have lipedema because genetically you will always have lipedema. There is no cure for it. So again, I just like to make sure that we're giving good information and not assigning a personal responsibility for like you didn't eat your way into lipedema.
No, and I appreciate you hit a very valid point that I have raised on most of my lives. And a doctor in today's world has to know so much. Now we're really going to school them on lipedema, but the food piece, it's never changed. And part of I wasn't making fun of the food guide earlier, but the reason I recommend
the food guide is wild. It's okay. We can agree on that.
Thank you for saying if you're not curious about you, whether that's experimenting new treatments, trying different foods, and some of that changes, maybe what worked for you 10, 15 years ago has evolved because you've evolved or you've aged, and knowing that it is genetic, there could be some hormone influences there. When I say, the food support, it's an emotional thing for me too. I could be locked at a good movie with a whole loaf of sourdough and butter and be the happiest woman on the planet. I'm German, so it's just how many of us breathe. It's how we were taught to cook, and sometimes we're busy doing so much work that we've lost that relationship with food. There's a few things out there that I get to enjoy in life, and food is one of them. But I've learned more in my 5-6 years about experimenting, and I hate the word diet because it sounds like something I need to commit to, but there's so many resources within this community, and you should seek out like-minded people that not only can give you advice in that direction, but can understand what you're personally dealing with. To Emma's point, this is a very emotional, very mental health thing. And that in itself, sometimes you should just have the damn cookie because the stress you cause debating, should I have the cookie? Oh, I shouldn't have the inflammation it causes through your body because of the mental stress sometimes isn't worth, we beat ourselves up, and I want you being supported, not having those doors slammed in your face. So again, maybe you need to put the lipedema nutrition guide in that pamphlet when you're talking to the doctors. But it's, changing your body, whatever diagnosis you are dealing with, because many of you have 1 or 2 or 6. It's an entire package. It's not just the food. It's not just the activity. But the mental health is one thing that is affected by everything. So thank you for bringing that up. And, sometimes part of the coping is just surrounding yourself. Maybe we don't have the answers today, but surrounding yourself by a bunch of people that are working towards that solution versus thinking that you're alone in this situation and hopeless. We don't need to be there anymore. So I'm very, very, I was a little excited when I was trying to decide what to talk with Emma about today, because there's a lot of women in Canada that we're intermingled with all of these groups because of the condition. But what's so critical with your care moving forward, not only be curious and seek those answers and contribute towards getting to them, but again, spend some time looking on their main website to just see some of these resources that Emma is talking about. I think you'll be, I don't want to say overwhelmed, but you'll be very impressed with how much is actually at your fingertips. And the fact that, I don't want to say the painful fat thing again, but when you're looking on the internet, you know, that there's lots of different versions of the name that you'll find. I want to just stress that it's also spelled differently depending on what part of the world you're in. And there's a lot of other sub conditions. So many of you are also dealing with Derkham's disease or Ehlers-Danlos syndrome or POTS. So there's other things once you sort of realize what you think you might have, because a lot of you are running around self-diagnosed. You know, there's other things that you'll find just so relevant in Emma's group and the other groups, as opposed to medically going to your doctor for those answers. They just don't have them yet. So,
Yeah.
what would you say? This is just something I was thinking about last night. Would you say there's any areas in the country that are maybe, obviously Manitoba, but are there any other areas in the country medically where it's a little bit more understood, more medically, anyone having success that you're aware of?
There's pockets of success in a couple of places in Canada. There are some very good clinics in Alberta and some excellent diagnosticians who have taken up the cause again in Alberta. The province of British Columbia has been known to pay for the surgeries only within the province, and unfortunately only with general plastic surgeons who are not specialized in lipedema, because the province because of a lack of standard of care, doesn't currently understand how dangerous it is to have a lipedema patient treated in a manner that would be considered cosmetic liposuction.
Can I actually have you expand? That's a really good point that wasn't on my list, but you had mentioned earlier on that, you know, we're doing an outreach to plastic surgeons. Ultimately, yes, those are the type of people, but there's a lot of plastic surgeons, not just in Canada, but world. Oh yeah, I know what it is. You know, these people aren't necessarily billing through the systems. There isn't the diligence. You know, a lot of you can walk into any place right now and get plastic surgery, but you can sometimes do more harm than good. Could you speak to that briefly?
Yeah, so anytime you have a marginalized community who has difficulty accessing healthcare resources, there will always be people who see that as an opportunity to profit from a community that is desperate. And unfortunately, because we don't have a Canadian standard of care that dictates what type of patients should be seen by what type of doctors for diagnosis, and the treatment and how it should be carried out, and what tools should be used and what methods, it becomes a bit of the Wild West. And that is true in a lot of countries, including those that have a standard of care, whereby a doctor can simply just say to you, I'm a lipedema specialist. But what does it mean to be a lipedema specialist? Someone who's going to provide surgical care for a lipedema patient. Things would include having been trained by people who are actual authors in standards of care. So teams like the teams in Germany and some of the teams in the US who are at the forefront of research and understanding. When we have a plastic surgeon who is charging in Canada upwards of $30,000 for what is effectively, to them, cosmetic liposuction. Let's be very clear, cosmetic liposuction and lipedema reduction surgery, while they might use the same tool effectively, you know, it's a liposuction tool, there are so many nuances to that treatment. It's the same reason that I wouldn't go to a dermatologist to treat my cardiac disease, even though they're both doctors. It's because they could use the same tools, but they don't have the same skills and experience. And so until we have things like a standard of care, or doctors who have invested their time into going to be with the specialists who genuinely have the ability to train them, which is something Lipedema Canada is working with some doctors to do. Awesome. Until we have that, we don't have the ability to say that someone is a lipedema specialist. And you really need to ask yourself questions. If a doctor is accepting money either through the private or public system in order to provide this care, it's important for us to understand as patients, what skills and qualifications do they have that makes sure that that treatment that you're going to receive is safe. This is where a lot of the conversation happens on the online groups about talking about our experiences with different doctors. But I would caution anyone in Canada who is hearing from a doctor who says they're a lipedema specialist, it isn't possible to have a lipedema specialist here until we have, at least at a minimum, a standard of care, or unless that doctor is also advocating at the government levels to have this as an insured service. Because if they're taking it as a fee for service, somebody who's making $30,000 off of your 5 liters of liposuction, probably doesn't have your best interests in mind. Yeah, this is not a slight to those doctors. I think that
Not at all.
people are accessing the care that they can get access to. And all of us want to feel better and want to get healthy and not be suffering. And people are accessing these doctors because for some, travel outside the country isn't an option. Or maybe the province, like in BC, is willing to pay for you to have those surgeries. There's no moral reason why you're not making a mistake. But it is important before we're doing things like pay for service to know it's just good to be really informed about where are the barriers in this treatment. Why is it risky to have these treatments done by a Canadian doctor at this time who is maybe self-proclaiming to know a lot about lipedema, but isn't walking the walk in a lot of other ways? We should be really curious about that. And you need to find the best care for yourself. And for some people, that's going to be in the US. For some, it's going to be in Germany. For some, it's going to be waiting until there is a Canadian doctor who can treat us. It's not my position nor Lipedema Canada's to tell you any of the choices that you've made are right or wrong. But what we are committed to doing is providing good, scholarly, evidence-based, research-backed information so that you can make the best choices about where to go next on your journey and how to advocate for yourself. Because we are, well, I might be a health professional in my workplace. From Lipedema Canada's perspective, I am like the rest of them. I am a volunteer on a board of directors trying to make change in a country that is really ready for lipedema healthcare change and has a long way to go.
Not just ready, but long overdue. So this is exciting. I know we wrap these things up in June and everybody's inundated, but what's coming up for the rest of the year? I know something I want to mention that you don't see as often as you used to, but I see Lipedema Canada, and sometimes it's provincial. I'm seeing on your page, sometimes we're doing educational events, and I see folks standing by tables. What else have you guys been out there doing on a public basis?
Recently, myself and Lipedema Canada and Lipedema Manitoba were invited to government and to be recognized for our advocacy work in this area. And so the provincial government spoke about us from the floor of the legislature, provide us with a beautiful certificate, including their speech. And our health minister has made a commitment to making a meeting with us so that we can sit down and create a working group to start our plan of let's get some services covered in the province. And we have initiatives, basically across the country, and each of the individual provincial associations is doing their hard work, whether they're affiliated with Lipedema Canada or not. Everybody is marching towards the same goal, which is increasing awareness and getting out there. So things we're working on at Lipedema Canada, we are engaging with doctors to find interested doctors to be trained to help us, to help write our standards of care. And we are preparing for some very exciting research to come out at the end of the year, which should have the ability to substantially change whether or not surgeries are covered in this country. And so we are preparing.
You've made a lot of progress up climbing that hill in the short time. I know this page just sort of started this year. The Facebook and a lot of the social has kind of been there longer to a degree. You personally much longer. That it doesn't seem sometimes like we're making a lot of progress, but at arm's length, from my perspective, you truly have. And the biggest thing that I before we sort of start wrapping up that I want to stress that Emma has mentioned is stay curious. If Emma wasn't curious, then a little pissed off, you got to fight for yourself. Sometimes you need others to lean upon to do that. But it's very exciting. There's other resources within your page. I'm on there talking about vibration machine support. If there's anything else that you feel you're not understanding as a Canadian individual, you're not sure where how to get involved, I would recommend going to the website or reaching out through the Facebook page. Make sure you are a member there and just spend some time. There's been a lot of information in the short time that page has been active. So it's a great place to spend some time and just see some of the work that has actually been accomplished. I think you'll be blown away with the progress, especially in the central area of Manitoba. And to Emma's point, if you're not in one of these areas that's a little bit more progressive as far as the understanding and some of the legislation, you know, it's got to start somewhere, and doing anything on a national scale to a degree is, it's almost too big of a chocolate bar to inhale in one bite. You got to break it into those relevant pieces. So are you looking, if you're looking for are you looking for representation anywhere, or do you have everywhere covered?
So because we are a national organization, we're
Yep.
by proxy, we're covered. But what we are looking for is we're currently recruiting for some board members with some special skills.
Okay.
So we have an active posting right now where we were seeking someone who is a government lobbyist. We believe we have actually filled that position.
Okay.
We're seeking somebody who has legal advice, legal expertise. So whether you're a lawyer or a paralegal, even potentially someone with nonprofit experience would be great. If
Okay.
you happen to also have lipedema, major extra thumbs up. We're looking for somebody to come on as our treasurer, because our new president is our she's a CPA, and so she'll be able to mentor you, but we need someone who's good at spreadsheets and good at keeping details and
Day stuff. Yep.
the day-to-day stuff. And then someone who can come and help organize us in a secretarial role, keeping minutes and doing things like that. We're passionately looking for skills. We're not specifically concerned about the geography of where you are. We recognize that in order to do this job for all of us as Lipedema Canada, we need to find the best and brightest, the people who are passionate advocates. You don't have to have been on a board before. It helps, but it's not required. We will mentor you through that process in a really supportive way. But if you're mad enough to say, I'm going to go do blah, 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 I want to challenge the government, I wanted this, come talk to us, because we want that kind of energy. We need more people who are fiercely passionate, but also really laser focused, because the only way that we make this different is if we all join together and follow what we've identified as this prescribed series of steps in order to solve this problem. So we are looking for people, and there's always ways to get involved. If you're interested in volunteering in your province, there may be contact events where we would love to have you be at a table and talk about lipedema, or meet with doctors. There's always ways to get involved.
That's
so
awesome.
Please go to our website, lipedemacanada.org, and check out the resources. But also, if you want to get involved, send us an email at info@lipedemacanada.org.
So if you have skills, you know, sometimes when you're climbing this hill, you know, you're not this type of person, or you're not that type of person. This has grown to a point where it's a big enough task where it has to be collective, and we've all got, you know, it's like, you know, we've all got one thing we can cook good. You know, everybody's got one good recipe, right? So, you know, I know my skill set. One of them is talking and rambling, and I want to be cognizant of Emma's time. But if you have something that you know, the reason we say you got to be a little pissed off or a little angry, that's motivating. You know, you're sick and tired of being sick and tired. So, you know, instead of spinning your wheels and wasting the energy that you do have, send it over to the energy bank with Lipedema Canada and contribute some of those skills. And sometimes those skills evolve. You know, if maybe you're involved in one capacity and you want to exercise something new, it feels good to contribute and work collaboratively, and it everybody feeds off of each other's energy. That's how a lot of these initiatives move forward. So,
Totally.
I really can't thank Emma enough. I haven't seen her physically on camera for probably a couple of years as far as talking, but you're very bright, you're very sparkly, your energy levels are up.
Thanks.
You know, I kind of stalk her a little bit on Facebook. I think I kind of pushed a vibration machine in your face at one point, and
You did, and I love it. I love my vibration plate. My vibration plate is what I call my hard reset. So anytime I am suddenly noticing through all of my busyness and whatever that I'm like, oh, I really feel really symptomatic. Like my legs are hurting at 10 minutes on my vibration plate, and I do, you know, my stretches and my squats and whatever while I'm there. And I step off and it's almost like it's the morning again. Like it's just a full reset, and that'll last me a couple of hours. And so I live for my vibration plate, especially post-operatively. It's just one of the tools in the toolbox that helps me just manage living with a chronic illness. And so, yeah, if anyone's curious about vibration, I know, Debbie, you wrote some amazing content for our website. We were able to put up what some of the medical contraindications. If you're wondering if a vibration plate is right for you, please just check there. Debbie provided all these answers on our patient resource page under vibration. And if you're curious about a vibration plate, definitely consider it, because it has really been a lifesaver in the self-care tools. And like we said, it's just one of many things you should be curious about how it would impact your lipedema journey. And I believe very much that as lipedema research advances, I mean, lipedema is an entity. It is known. I know you're being facetious when you say it doesn't exist. It does.
But you
But
know what I
what
mean?
I
Like
hear
the
you
term
saying,
lipedema, if isn't not like
right,
diabetes or like
right.
breast cancer is another good one you brought up.
Yeah, but as the research evolves, I'm confident that they will start investigating what is the specific, studyable cause of it. Why does the vibration assist us? So in the meantime, while there may not be a specific study that says this is definitively working, one thing this community is really, really good at is telling each other what's been working well for each other.
Yes.
And as long as trying vibration is safe for you, and there's no reason why your doctor says, oh, this particular activity would cause you harm, then if it's possible that it might improve your situation, study or no study, lots of the self-care things that we try might be trial and error until researchers get a hold of a good reason to study it. And that's part of advocating for our disease at this time.
And again, be curious. It's, things
Curious.
evolve. The more research, there's kind of a fine line between research and, many like Emma, the research is a foundation or a basis to keep you curious. What you want to make sure that you do is experiment and explore until sometimes the research catches up. Heat's another one. I keep getting told, oh, you can't tolerate heat with lipedema. I want to see that study where, sometimes we hear something so many times we believe it's true, and it might be true for you, but it may not be true for me. So be curious as you evolve. And Emma is looking very different. She's had a lot of surgeries, but she's also put in a lot of personal time and effort into her care. And as you progress in your self-care, your tolerance sometimes evolves and changes
It
with that
does.
too. So
Yeah.
good for you. You've had a heck of a year. You should be like pressed
Laying on
over
the
in some chair. What's the
ground.
what's the rest of what do you got going on personally this summer? Anything exciting?
You know what, just trying to actually this will be the first summer that I'm actually home in town and not immediately recovering from an operation. So
Nice.
I'm looking forward to potentially finding out if there's still beaches in Manitoba, and bravely wearing a bathing suit out into the world, because obviously our bodies change a lot, especially even after surgery. We're never all the way at the place where we feel safe and confident all the time.
Yep.
I've gotten really good at answering questions about my body while I'm wearing a bathing suit or whatever such thing. So yeah, but just taking a little bit of time and then heading back over to Germany because, like I mentioned, lipedema is a genetic illness, and unfortunately, my daughter also has it and needs to start treatment. So I'll be transitioning to a role within lipedema that I haven't been in yet, which is supporting my child through surgery, but also feeling really empowered to know that even as a teenager, she now has an answer to why her body is hurting her and causing disability, and working with some of the experts in the world to try and make sure that she doesn't have to spend the first 30 years of her life suffering the way I spent the first 37 years of mine. So
What a fantastic opportunity, not to say,
yeah,
opportunity for her to have this, but to have not only a mentor and guidance in mom, but there's so many in this community with children that are going through that same experience. Almost sounds like a new Facebook page, Lipedema for Teens. But everything else you're going through as a teenage girl with development issues and boys and society, you know, um, how delightful for her that she has you to hold her hand and a community to walk forward in versus this, storm cloud of nothingness that many of you had to,
yeah.
to face on your own back in the day.
We're
Um,
doing our best. She was the one that suggested that Lipedema Canada create a TikTok because we are well aware that our younger contingent doesn't live on Facebook. That's where our millennials and older population tend to hang out. So Lipedema Canada has expanded into TikTok and also into Instagram to try, like you said, and just be available in the places where people may find themselves, be accessible depending on what your tech comfort is.
yep.
I think, it's interesting while we've been talking and I'm thinking about how we got here. How did we get from each of us as directors was struggling in our own ways, and enough really passionate people came together and started to do what no one had yet done in Canada. Not because there weren't people who wanted to, but because I think even for myself, this was such an intimidating thing to start because it's such a big problem. How do you even begin? But I think that a lot of the people we're interacting with, they have a commonality that I think is really, really amazing. And you touched on this early. They come in excited and passionate. They come in excited to learn and excited to understand. And they're like, I'm going to find the resources. I'm going to find the way. And what happens to a lot of us is that over time, that gets beaten out of you by gaslit experiences with your physician, or even if you have a great physician and they just tell you, listen, there aren't services available. We don't know what to do for you. We don't know how to send you to the next place. There may be a lot of reasons why somebody eventually just sort of shuts down and says, I just don't want to fight anymore. And what we're really trying to do at the end of the day is that we're trying to make it so that no one ever has to fight that hard. But what I think is great about the website and about what we created is that every one of those comments that showed up in a Facebook post at some point between the start of my journey and now, where we advised each other, someone says, well, where do I find a surgeon? Well, how do I know what to write in a letter of medical necessity? What does the diagnosis letter even look like? What do I do with my taxes if I had to pay for surgery on my own? Where do I get a brochure to share with my doctor, etc.? We took every one of those things that we were always, us as board members, were long before the board, we're always answering on Facebook groups far and wide, and we centralized it. We said, we're going to create a unified place where you can find the answers you're looking for, and where we'll create resources like here's what a medical diagnosis letter looks like. Here's what a letter of medical necessity that would meet the criteria for you to apply for coverage, what it would look like. Here's a resource to give to your clinician so that they can better support you. That's what we're working on. So if you find yourself at any stage of that journey, feeling the passion still, curious for answers, or even just really tired and not sure you want to keep fighting, think about joining us. Think about getting involved, and head to the website first, because we centralized it for you, because we lived it and we live it. And if you can think of a resource that you need that we haven't created, we want you to reach out to us and tell us, because we don't have all the answers. We're just trying to make the problem a little easier to manage.
Post somewhere, because as awesome as Facebook is as a community, if I sent something in a personal message, or you can't really search it, so where did I say that thing really well? Where did I put that?
Yeah. And I used to do that too. I was always looking, I was like, oh, someone said that there was a specific doctor in this place that could do these things. And
where did I see that?
Hours searching through the tens of groups, going, where was that comment, and reaching out to others going, did you see it? And we went, that's one of the best things we can do as Lipedema Canada, is let's take the information that everyone is trying to share and let us centralize it. So,
or you're not a member of the group, and so you find the answer your best friend's looking for, and you tag her, and she's not. You can't even.
She's not in the group.
Yeah, so. It's more. I think that if I had to pick one word, because you've been doing a lot of good work, as has many in Canada for a long time, it's convenient. And it's logical. It's one accessible point, because we recognize not everybody's on Facebook, but us as community people running these groups, it gives us more functionality without, and even a website. A website is great, but you don't get that real time interaction. You don't get the heart, the like, the love, the memes. So now you have somewhere where you know where you saw it, because we're starting to centralize these resources. Absolutely. And share far and wide.
There's exciting things on the horizon for lipedema. Like, honestly, we are waiting for, and this could be a whole other talk, by the way, what I'll mention just now.
Maybe we do a follow-up.
Yeah, maybe we do a follow-up. One of the biggest issues is that people are always asking, especially to me, because I challenged the province and won, was, well, how do I get surgery covered by my province? And currently, the provinces have all been in coordination with each other. They've all been talking. We have all the receipts on this. And they effectively decided that until there is a randomized control, investigator blind, proof of a study that shows that the surgeries are effective beyond a shadow of a doubt, not just from the patient said it was helpful, and all of there's very, very real qualitative research that says these surgeries definitely help people. They absolutely.
But they're not willing to fund that, because we don't.
Right. They
Yeah.
need concrete, this is how healthcare works in Canada. They need a concrete, scientific gold standard study that says these surgeries are effective as compared to doing nothing. Well, the good news for the lipedema community is 2 studies exactly like that were started in 2020, and they are due to produce results in Christmas of this year and then into early next year. It's because what they did is they followed lipedema patients through the over 500 of them. They followed them through conservative management of like just compression and MLD.
Germany, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
Germany.
Okay. I know which one you're. Okay.
Yeah,
Okay. Okay.
we're talking about the lip leg study.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
yeah, anyway, so the study design is excellent, but they also wanted to not just follow the patients through their initial surgeries, but they needed to be able to prove that years down the road that
It
they were
was.
still receiving the benefits. And so in order to do that, it needed to be a long form study. So it's been 5 years. So those results, like I said, are
Isn't enough, right? The fact that you're not in, right? I get it. And keep in mind, most of my vibration machine world, any of the real research is all German too, right? So
well, and yes,
there's a
yeah.
different standard even before the study itself on what the tick list looks like. Any study I've ever done with a vibration machine in Canada or the States, I've had to give them a protocol document and say, you need to validate the equipment first. Why? Because the manufacturer said it's no, you do this, right? Germany's very different because that's where the technology stems from. I don't want to say things are better in Germany, but
they're just further ahead. So Germany was where this disease was initially discovered. And so in Germany, lipedema is taught in their medical schools, nursing schools, physiotherapy schools.
that's the difference.
It's a required entry to practice. It's one of the questions on their exams. Like, so they as a healthcare community have much more knowledge about it. And this is where the research tends to happen.
And you're personally leaning on your now care provider there for some insight for your steps kind of thing too, probably?
I am fortunate that my care provider is one of the principal researchers on the lip leg study, and as he's a very, very well-known doctor in the lipedema community, he and other incredible allies, including those from the States, are all part of this big conglomerate. And so what this means for Canada, and to be more succinct, what this means for Canadians who are like, how do I get coverage? When these studies results come out, we will be able to ask the government to reevaluate their position based on scholarly evidence that is research-based, multi-center, the gold standard. And from there, because the Canada Health Act prescribes that all surgeries that are medically necessary and not deemed emerging or experimental, and currently, because we lack the randomized control study, our surgeries have been deemed emerging, which is one step above experimental, but one step below an insured service. We want it to be an insured service. And so we are trying to work with the provinces to get practitioners ready to serve this community, because that research is coming fast.
Information and validating it later versus everything. No, that's cool. Okay, that's yeah, so we should maybe plan for another one as that gets going. And you know, I'm the Energizer Bunny, so we'll talk more about maybe what I can do to help support you guys too. I want to thank you for joining me today. Nothing happens overnight, but there's been a lot of progress. And I can't stress enough to support these individuals who are out there doing the good work. They're advocating on your behalf. You don't need to do this on your own, but everybody needs a little help sometime. And when you're dealing with topics this big on a national level, there's so many nuances and intricacies, and sometimes just knowing you're supported and there's people that appreciate the work is all the motivation that some of us need to keep doing the good work. So thank you for joining me today, Emma.
Thank you so much for having me. It was great to sit and talk with you and get to talk about some of these hot button lipedema issues and talk about passion and progress. So it's great. Thank you.
And again, I just want to stress, if you do want some support, specifically if you're in Canada and you're just hearing about these groups for the first time today, I will post in the comments after this video and in the description where you can get in touch with not just the social community, the infrastructure of Lipedema Canada, but the bigger organization, Lipedema, the website with Lipedema Canada, the website where a lot of this documentation is that Emma referred to, how you can participate in your province, and invest some time looking to see what work is already done, but before approaching them with common questions. We're all excited, and it puts new wind in our sails, but they spend a lot of time answering questions and consolidating this information to a central place, because they know, they've been there, they know the questions you're asking them. So thanks again. I think we might do a follow-up, because there's a lot of things coming up over the summer and the fall, and I want to make sure this group gets all the traction it can get. If you do not follow them, follow them, follow them, follow them. It's a better place to ask those type of questions. I get a little distracted sometimes, and I hate missing something that, even though it's related to lipedema, there's another resource now that might be a little bit more up your niche if you're in the Canadian market. So thank you again for joining me. You guys have a great rest of your week, and don't work too hard.